if we get even one person, one viewer with this program that we might be able to help with some of the information that's shared on here, then it's all worth it. Hey everyone, Glenn Victor here. Peace. Welcome to episode 1 of season 2 of the Dare Me podcast. We are recording right now at the PFX Digital Studios in West Orlando, and right out of the gate we're going to bring in our co-host and producer Dean Baker is here with us, handling all the stuff behind the scenes. Welcome back to the Dare Me podcast, Dean.
Well, thank you very much, Glenn. Welcome back to the season 2.
Yeah,
this is monumental. It's been a little bit of a hiatus here.
It really is in a lot of ways for me, because it's been a long time. You know, I was looking at the calendar earlier today, and it's been almost 2.5 years since we concluded the first season. We had 50 episodes in that first season of the Dare Me podcast, going live every Sunday and all that. It was a lot of work, but a lot of fun too. And the most important thing is we know that we helped some people, which was the whole idea right out of the gate. So, Dean, if it's all right with you, I'm going to go right into what this podcast is all about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I started this podcast because I just felt like I had no right to keep to myself what happened with me with a horrible opioid addiction. And I broke my ankle, and I got prescribed the Norcos, Vicodins, whatever you want to call it, and I ended up going on a 9-year run with that shit. I was the proverbial functioning addict. And then them last couple of years, it got bad, and then I no longer really could function anymore, certainly not without taking the dope, and it just was the worst thing I ever went through in my life. I've never thought in a million years something like that would happen to a guy like me. I have a long history with addiction that I'll talk a little bit more about on this show. We've talked about on plenty others, and we'll certainly talk more about going forward. But I started getting loaded as a kid in my teenage years, 12, 13 years old, like a lot of people I know in the areas I grew up. I often will joke, but quite serious, say, the neighborhoods I lived in, we were like that 70s show on steroids. And so, yeah, man, a lot of horrible things happened through those years, and I ended up getting clean again at 24 years old, just shy of 25 years old, and I stayed clean for almost 17 years. Then I had a bad relapse that lasted about 5 years. I was drinking, smoking a little weed, and I got clean again for another 6 years. And then I broke my ankle and went on that horrible opioid run. Dean, as you know, I've said to you before on this show that I really believe if I hadn't got clean this time when I did, I'd probably be dead right now because of all the fentanyl that's out there. When I got clean this time around, fentanyl was a thing. It was definitely out there. Everybody knew about fentanyl, and be careful, that shit's being laced all into fake pills and all that stuff. And I don't have any doubt I got some of that stuff at one point. It was definitely out there, but not like it is now. It's bad, and I can't even begin to describe or say the number of people that I've met in these last several years, because by the way, pretty important, I probably should mention, I have over 5 years clean again. It's been 5 years as of March 11th since I put any opiate of any kind in this body. And so our hope, again, getting back to the purpose of the show, is that we might reach even one person who's still struggling. We like to think we have good content, it's entertaining, and certainly we'd like to think we can be entertaining, helpful to people that are already in recovery. We really hope to get to people still struggling, because when I was struggling, and especially that last year or so before I got off the opiates, I was looking for information online, Googling, YouTube, how to get through opiate withdrawals and all the things. And there's good information out there, a lot of which we've talked about on this podcast, but there's nothing like what we're doing, nothing I've ever seen like what we're doing. We're hoping to reach that person who at 3 o'clock in the morning is jonesing, regretting the way they're living, wishing they could get clean again, looking for information, who might stumble on our stuff. That's who we're really hoping to reach. So if that might be you, don't give up. Keep going. You can do it. You can get off the opiates and get your life back. Believe me, if I could do it, anybody can do it. Like I said, I was hooked on that shit for 9 years. And I've been clean now for almost 5.5. So it definitely can be done. Those are the types of things we like to talk about on this podcast. But there's an old saying, too, that I've learned in recovery, as they say. Someone taught me this a long time ago, and said, this old timer, Glenn, any old asshole can get clean. Go into detox, go into a rehab center, handcuff yourself to the bedpost in your room and toss the keys to the other side of the room so you can't get to them and get out to go and try to score dope with the dope man or whatever. If you want to get clean, you can get clean, but how you gonna stay clean? And those are the kinds of things we like to talk about on this podcast too. And, I've said it on here before. It's like I have my program, which for me is a 12-step program. Specifically, I'm an NA guy. I'm not trying to represent or anything like that, but I can damn sure talk about what I do in my life to try to stay clean. And going to NA meetings has definitely been a big part of my story and history, which we'll talk more about. But my program as a whole involves a lot of other things than just going to a 12-step meeting. That really helps me with that mental part of the struggle and the sickness, because even though you've been through hell, your thinking will still try to romance you back to picking that shit up again. So the meetings really do help with that. You get reminded a lot when you see newcomers walk in that are, as we say, tore up from the floor up and in bad shape. Nobody ends up at an NA meeting by mistake. It's usually because your life's pretty screwed up and you're looking for help. So yeah, man, going to them meetings is a good place to remind yourself you don't want to go back to living like that. But it also involves a lot of other things like fitness and exercise. My program does, going to the gym on a regular basis. When you're kicking, you have zero energy. You ain't even thinking about going to the gym. But once you start getting through those, withdrawal symptoms after, so much time goes by, a week, couple of weeks, for some people it's more, some a little less, whatever. Going to the gym is one of the best things I ever did for myself. Gets the endorphins flowing, gets the dopamine flowing, the adrenaline flowing. Never once have I left the gym feeling worse than when I went. I always feel better. Let me try to talk a little bit on here about spirituality and enlightenment, because like I said, when you go into a 12-step AA, NA, fucking A, whatever kind of meeting, and you're hoping to get clean, get sober, get help, usually you don't have any peace in your life. Like I said, things are pretty fucked up if you end up at a 12-step meeting. You don't end up there by accident. So Yeah, man, we like talking about that kind of stuff on this podcast, and we have, and we will some more. So it's all coming up on this season of the Dare Me podcast. We've got some great guests lined up already, a few more we're hoping to secure, keeping our fingers crossed on that. But we definitely will be having some great guests this season coming in to talk about the types of things that I just kind of went over. So with all that said,
Hey, Glenn, I gotta interrupt here.
Yeah.
Something you said about going into meetings and stuff like that. Do you find it maybe more strength in numbers kind of thing? Is that kind of a part of it, Being in the same boat with everybody else is,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of, going to meetings. I mean, when you get into reading some of the 12-step literature, it's always recommended that, as hard as it may be sometimes, to stay away from old places and old faces, certainly old places and faces where you were using.
Too. Yeah.
So, we're social creatures by nature, right? But, it is exactly what you said, strength in numbers, because, you'll meet people from all walks of life in the 12 steps. And I'm saying 12 steps. There's a lot of other recovery groups out there too, not just the 12-step AA, NA, OA, GA. You've got Dharma recovery, you've got Smart recovery, you've got Celebrate recovery, Recover Out Loud groups. Mm-hmm. The 12-step groups certainly have been a big part of my journey. And like I said, I think of myself as a NA guy. I'll also say that the 12-step groups certainly don't have a monopoly on how to get and or stay clean. Like I said, even with myself, my program of choice, as we sometimes jokingly say, because everybody had a drug of choice, my program of choice is NA. But my recovery as a whole involves a lot of other things. Like I said, working on fitness, working on enlightenment and spirituality, being involved in yoga and things to that nature. Something we haven't talked about yet, but music therapy is huge and it's deep. We've gotten into it before on this show many, many times in season 1, but it really is deep. Listening to music releases dopamine and endorphins in the brain and things to that nature. So yeah, for somebody who is kicking dope and going through those horrible withdrawals for those first few days, that first week, I say it all the time, embrace the music, man, but remember, it's good to pick the music for the mood you want to create, not necessarily let the music create the mood, because we all know, there's very positive, upbeat messages in music, and sometimes, you can be singing the blues, so I think it's a good idea to try to rock and roll, some upbeat music when you're going through that shit. So, yeah, man, we talk about all those different things on the podcast. And, I mentioned that in the first season, we definitely were able to help some people. And bringing this show back for a season 2, it was, my plan all along. I didn't think it would take as long as it has now that it's been 2.5 years, but a variety of things happen, just changes, life shows up. And so anyway, we're back, and part of the reason is because this problem just has not gone away. And one of the scary things for those of us that are active in the recovery community is that because there has been an improvement, that the topic will start to fall to the wayside. There have been improvements, and that's wonderful. We'd like to think that even what we're doing with our small little podcast might have helped make a difference in some small way. But the numbers are still staggering. So, Dean, if we can, let's bring up our first graphic for the show today. We had some stats that we looked up. And, if you'll indulge me here, you can see that right now, there's a prediction that when they tally up all the numbers at the end of this year, we will have had over 69,000 drug overdose deaths here in the United States. And actually, they're still tallying the numbers from last year. So that, like I said, when they're done, we'll take it through January 2026. But here's the thing. It's a 13% decline in overdose fatalities compared to the previous year. And that's great. And then it talks about opioids specifically. So here it's saying they fell sharply to 54,000 in the last year of stats available at the end of 2024 from 79,000 the year before. And that's fantastic with, all the lawsuits and the crackdown and everything like that. What I'll also say is this. Let's put those numbers in perspective for a moment. We just went from 9 people dying an hour, okay, to 6 people dying an hour from an opioid overdose, okay? So, when you look at it that way, it doesn't seem like as much of a decline as the numbers initially indicate. I was just doing math on my calculator real quick. That's still 147 people a day dying from an opioid overdose. And again, that's just the opioids. That's not drug overdoses as a whole, which of course include a lot of other things like methamphetamine, cocaine, whatever the case may be. So with all that said, y'all, and you can see there's some demographic information included in this slide too, but there's still a legitimate, real need for the type of program we're doing here, trying to reach out and help people, because I can guarantee you that there are people just like I was looking for information online, how to get through opiate withdrawals, what's the easiest way to get through opiate withdrawals, what can you do at home to get through opiate withdrawals. I legit am in pain. I need medication. What options do I have? So we're going to be talking about all that stuff as we move forward with this season of the podcast. We had a chart, too, that I thought we'd show just briefly to kind of give you an idea of what these numbers look like when we bring them up on a chart. There you go. So you can see right around January of 2023 to 2024 is when the opioid deaths really started to peak. And right after, because we started the season 1 podcast in March of 2024. So we were right at about the peak. And again, you can see that progress is being made. For a variety of reasons. We don't want to get into politics. That's not what this show is about. We don't talk about politics because we don't want to alienate anyone over political beliefs. We want to get through to anybody we can who we might be able to inspire or share some hope with and what have you. But anyhow, this is a graph recent, just from June 7th. So progress is being made. That's a wonderful thing, but we can't give up now. We got to keep going and, just keep trying to get the message out there more and more and more. And I say, even especially to our young people, that this shit is not to be fucked with. It is like killing people left and right still. Still, 147 people a day dying from an opioid overdose in the United States. Instead of 9 people an hour dying, 6 people an hour. That's still horrible. It's horrifying. So just thought we'd recap where we're at with the whole opioid epidemic since we wrapped up season 1 a little over 2 years ago. It's gotten better, but it ain't going away. And you know what's horrible, even for people involved in going to different recovery group meetings, whether it's 12-step or the others I mentioned, is that if you're going to keep going to those meetings, you're going to need a good suit. is the saying that a lot of times people are taught. Old timer told me once a long time ago, Glenn, you're going to keep coming around here. You got to get a good suit because you are going to go to some NA funerals. And if you don't stay off of that shit, we might just need that suit for you. So, yeah, man, unfortunately, I got one of them suits, and I've been to my share of NA funerals, and it's the saddest damn thing you ever seen in your life. Watching people's families show up and, of course, there's always fellowship people when you go to those things, but it's horrible. And so another reason why I really wanted to do season 2 of this podcast, because I truly do feel, as I've said on here many times before, like I'm living on borrowed time. Like I said, had I not gotten clean when I did, there's no doubt in my mind that the fentanyl would have got to me and I'd be dead by now. So, yeah, man, when I think about all the people that I literally sat right next to at different meetings I've gone to, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, different meetings to try to help me stay clean. And then you come back a couple nights later and people are crying and you ask, well, what happened? What's going on? And, well, so-and-so went back out and got some of that bullshit and died, So like we say, man, if we can help even one person with what we're doing with this podcast, then it's all worth it. So, yeah, we're back, man. We're back. So, Dean, what do you think? Was that a good way to describe what we're trying to do with this show and, where we're at with it all?
It's promising that the numbers are dropping. But like you said, it's shocking to know that many people every hour or, that many people a year are going. I've in the last 2 years, I've known a couple of people to go, through overdoses and it was likely fentanyl, So it's just, wow. It's if it hasn't touched every life, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Well, and you know what, Dean, I appreciate you saying that because we both happen to know some former mutual colleagues that, aren't here anymore because of that sickness, that lifestyle that they've gotten caught up in. And so, I want to say thank you to you for agreeing to do the season 2 of the podcast and working together with me here. I get people ask about you all the time. So glad we're back here, So, you know what? With all that said, I think it's a good time to go right into the news, which we're going to continue doing. The opioid crisis in the news. We did that every episode of season 1, where we just kind of try to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the opioid crisis in the news. And we get stories not just from around the U.S., but literally other parts of the world sometimes. But I thought it was really important. It's great that we're seeing an improvement. Numbers are coming down. But this first story, I think, is a prime example of why it's so important to stay adamant about this, because as you'll see in this headline that we're about to show, that it ain't no joke out there. The fentanyl might be coming down, so the drug dealers are looking for more and more and more ways to get people addicted. And so this it ain't really new anymore. It's been around a little while, but it's certainly a hot topic right now. This new dangerous synthetic opioid is emerging in the tri-state area in D.C., but it really in lots of different places around the country now, that they're saying is like 10 times more potent than fentanyl. It blows my mind. Let's show that next slide, Dean. There's a lot of verbiage here. I'm not going to sit here and read to everyone, but I just thought we'd bring this up because, first of all, you can see in the picture, the pills look, just like the ones that you would get with a prescription. They've really gotten good at making this stuff look like the real deal. But as it says here, the DEA, we got this story right from the DEA website, is warning area residents of a new drug emerging in the area that's as dangerous and deadly, if not more, than fentanyl. And these are known as what people have begun calling them as nitazene or nits, or the street name actually for them is ISO, ISO. And the reason for that, if you look there in the middle of the page there, it's, and I probably won't pronounce it right, isotonitazene, aka nitazene or ISO. And so, yeah, this drug, it's been around a while, but now they're putting that shit in the fake pills just because it's more potent, and they're not telling anybody. In fact, go to the next slide if you would, Dean. I just thought we'd show this because it iterates in the article what I think is so important for us all to remember. Tragically, many of these overdose victims have no idea they're ingesting these dangerous and extremely potent drugs. And that's the whole thing, you know, because there's, I wanted to talk about this earlier, but there's this whole fucking stigma still attached to this sickness of addiction and substance abuse disorder. And so even with myself doing this podcast, you know, I've said it many times and put promo reels out there that, you know, that's kind of how we came up with the name Dare Me. Like, dare me to be open and come out and talk openly and publicly about my struggles with addiction, because there is a stigma out there. And, you know, especially I think sometimes for people in the corporate world or people who are older, we get so worried about, oh God, what's other people going to think? What about my reputation? What about my livelihood? People are going to laugh and make fun and tease and all that. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're talking about life and death here, talking about saving our lives, saving the lives of our kids, our mothers, our fathers, our friends, our colleagues. And we got to talk about it. And so, yeah, this stigma is out there where people just don't want their reputation to be harmed. When at the end of the day, like I said, it's about life and death and about helping not just other people, but helping ourselves too. It reminds me of a story. When I was visiting up in Detroit, I bumped into this old timer I've known for years and years. And, you know, I had been back from my relapse for a while, and he saw I was pretty serious about, you know, getting and staying clean again this time. And before I left, I remember him saying to me, Glenn, glad you made it back, man. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. And then I took a couple of steps, and he said, oh, and by the way, Glenn, don't fuck it up this time. Lives are at stake, including yours. So I tell that little story to kind of reiterate like what I was saying, man. You know, people get so caught up in the stigma of addiction and all that other stuff when it's killing tens of thousands of our brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, friends, colleagues all the time. And I'm convinced one of the ways that we help with that problem is to talk about it. And so, once again, here we are with the podcast. And like I said, man, the drug dealers, they're not concerned at all about anybody's health. They just want that money. And now they're developing even more potent drugs. And 9 times out of 10, when people take this shit with the fentanyl or now with the nitazene in it, they don't know that's what they're taking. We hear stories about kids all the time, teenagers, man, they buy a Percocet from somebody, one perk to, you know, hopefully, you know, go have fun at a party or whatever, and it ends up fucking killing them. You know, you just can't trust who you're getting it from. You might think it's a good friend. Oh, they got good connects. No, it's good. It's legit. But you never know what another person's going through and what they might do to get money so they can help support their habit, you know. So, yeah, man. Anyways, that's me kind of going on that little soapbox. So, Dean, let's bring up our next slide because I thought we'd talk about this a little bit on this particular edition of the show. That it just goes to show how insane this whole thing is, man. So this story we pulled from U.S. News and World Report. We ain't biased that way. We don't give a fuck, what news source. I mean, we watch to make sure things aren't slanted and stuff, but we're not in any way trying to be political. But I just point that out, that we get stories from all kinds of different sources. It doesn't matter. This one just happened to be from the U.S. News and World Report. But there were a bunch of stories out there on this particular topic where the governor in New Mexico and this is a recent story, by the way. This is just like from 2 days ago, June 24th, 2026. The governor is calling for a criminal probe of the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, allowing fentanyl shipments to hit the streets. So, Dean, I was hoping to even bring you into this part of the conversation because, I think it's important probably, to mention that, Dean is not part of the recovery community, didn't struggle with the sickness of addiction like I have. So I like that you bring another perspective to the show and the conversations. So the DEA explained this, that they're going for higher level drug dealers. They're hoping to get to the cartel or whoever the fuck. So they're working with these street level dealers, and they allowed them to actually go out and sell hundreds of these fake fentanyl pills in hopes that as, the relationship with these people grew and they got more of their trust, they might get to a higher level. But then you got people whose kids are out on the street getting this shit and fucking dying. Now the governor's calling for a criminal probe. So, Dean, I think to myself sometimes when I'm telling my story, for people who do follow along with it, it's like, big fucking deal. Another druggie got clean, because you hear about all these stories in the news all the time, especially with high profile people. I don't even need to pick no names, but there's 1,000,001 podcasts, interviews, celeb interviews, whatever you want to call it, of people that got clean and now they've turned their life around, they found Jesus, whatever the fuck, hey, and more power to them. That's great. What I'll also say is I do sometimes think to myself like, oh my God, man, some of the people I used to work with in my professional life and all that shit, are maybe sometimes thinking that, and probably there are some who are like, oh, fuck, another druggie got clean, no big deal, But the point I'm making is I love the idea of having your perspective, Dean, on a story like that. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, and certainly I have my opinion, which I'll share, but what's your thoughts on a story like that? Do you think that, the DEA is in the wrong, letting these street-level dealers push their dope in hopes that they can get to a higher level in the chain, or do you think that's a bad idea? What do you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, like any agency, the DEA is completely understaffed and underfunded. They've got an entire continent to cover, and I'm sure they're more interested in the big bust. So it means I also think that probably street level dealers know how to get away with dealing without being charged with dealing. You hear things like, well, if you have so many pills in your pocket, if this number of pills, you're a dealer. That number of pills, you're not a dealer. You're busted for possession, which means they're out. They're back on the street. So I'm kind of thinking that there's a lot of gray area, which is allowing this stuff to just, and there's no answer. There's no answer unless you want to change a law every week. And so that they can't keep up with you. It's like, was it 29 pills or 30 pills do I have keep on me?
Here's what I think's going on. I mean, there's clearly what's going on is they're looking at it like, well, collateral damage. If we can save more people by going after the higher level drug dealers and knock them out of commission, we're going to lose a lot less people to a drug overdose than we will by allowing these street level dealers to go out there. But you tell that to a parent who just lost their 16-year-old daughter or somebody who's lost their 20-year-old son. Well, they were collateral damage because we were trying to get to a higher level to take more drugs off the street. So I agree with you, Dean. There's no simple answer to this. How do you fucking answer this question? But I wanted to bring this story up today because it caught my attention right out of the fucking gate. Like, oh my God, man, who's the guy that makes that decision, you know? And he's got to go ahead and put his head on the pillow each night, You
got to imagine, too, I mean, New Mexico, it's a U.S. border state. So,
yeah, that's true.
So, there's likely maybe one direction the drugs are coming from, and the DA can only go so far. They can only go so far to the border before they go, now it's more international. There's things we can't do. We have to go get the government involved, and if we need to pursue beyond the border, you know how it gets with that. Yeah. They go after guys like Noriega. They go, they went after people, and it was literally an act of Congress to do all that.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic to think about. It's like picking the lesser of two evils. Is that a way to say it? But I wanted to bring this story up again, though, because, again, like I said, y'all, we hear all these stories about how the overdose rates have come down and this and that and the other. Yet you still got stories like this going on. Yeah. To me, this is a big fucking story, man. This is the DEA allowing drug dealers to go out and deal this bullshit dope on the street, knowing that there's a chance it's going to kill someone. But the problem is so immense that they're saying the collateral damage of that is worth it to try to get to the bigger dealers. That's what it's saying at the end of the day. Any fucking way you slice it or dice it. And I just think to myself, like, oh, good God, how could this be happening? And it is.
It's bigger than the street level dealers. It's just so much bigger than that. And I think, especially because it's a New Mexico state that's more, the governor is more interested in this than most other. I mean, Iowa, Indiana, they have their problems, but they're not. No,
that makes good sense. It is a border state, so that probably does play into the equation, Well, Dean, let's go on to this next slide, because I thought it would be interesting to talk about this a little bit now as well. Like I said, we're trying to re-emphasize that this problem has not gone away. It's gotten better, but still, like I said, instead of 9 people dying an hour from an opioid overdose in the U.S., it's 6 an hour. 1 an hour is too many. Well, as we know, there were all these different lawsuits against Big Pharma, Purdue, and all the rest. And, we talked about it at the time when all this money was being settled on, like, oh, good God, who is going to keep an eye on all this? Who is going to be the watchdog group? Because when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, damn well everybody and their brother wants to get their, piece of that pie. And, I don't have much doubt there's going to be some scandal going on. There probably already has. But I just like the idea of us keeping up to date on what that money is being allocated to and what it's being used for. So there's a great amount of information out there on the internet and whatnot about what is being done with that money. But I thought we would just give a little slice of small town America to see what it's being used for. So this is out of a place called Wake County in North Carolina. The Carolinas took it pretty bad with the opioid crisis, along with Virginia and, those states in that area that, with the coal mining and all that stuff. So Anyway, this is a recent story from just yesterday, June 25th. Wake County shares update on national opioid settlement funds at their annual community meeting. And you can see there in the second line, it says they will receive more than $67 million in opioid settlement funds over the course of 18 years. Now, think about that, y'all. Like I said, this is just one little small county in the whole, United States of America, and they're getting 67 mil. So, Dean, let's see what they're planning on using this for, which I think the categories they selected are great. It does beg the question with some of these categories, as you'll see in this next slide here, what determines, falls into each category? What qualifies whatever group or agency or person that comes knocking on the door for a piece of this are in place? How do they qualify? All that stuff. And I'm sure all that stuff is there in writing, but let's talk about this for just a moment. So, the first one is a collaborative strategic planning. Now, that's pretty open-ended, but $350K just to strategic planning. So what is that? Meetings to determine how the money is going to be allocated in all these other categories? I just would be curious to know how $350,000 is allocated to collaborative strategic planning. What? I mean, doesn't it make you wonder, Dean? I mean, we can have a meeting, put out a pot of coffee and a few dozen donuts, and that don't come to $350K. So, anyways, man, yeah. Next one, evidence-based addiction treatment, $2.7 million. Evidence-based is, I think, the qualifier there, y'all. It can't just be some, random treatment option or some rogue treatment option, but again, it begs the question: what's that qualifier evidence-based addiction treatment mean? And the next one, recovery support services. That's a wide open topic. So, I'm sure that they probably have descriptions for each of these categories, but $4 million for that. Recovery housing support, $4 million for that. I don't think that's a horrible thing. A lot of the homeless problem are people suffering from drug abuse, or addiction, substance abuse disorder. The homeless thing is out of control in certain parts of the country. And so, yeah, man, I don't think that's a bad category to have in there. Early intervention is the next one. $2 million allocated to early intervention. So I don't know what kind of programs are these. Like, the name of our podcast is Dare Me, but of course everybody remembers the DARE program when they were younger and in school. I believe the DARE program's still around. So perhaps that's part of the early intervention area. It does beg the question, $2 million is being allocated to early intervention. What does that include? Does that include speakers going into junior high and high schools, colleges, what have you? We're keeping an eye on you, Wake County, and all the rest of them around the country that got all this money, man, because we had an attorney on last season, Dean. You probably remember attorney Dennis Salvaggio, and we asked him, his opinion on how, all this settlement money should be used. And if you remember, Dean, he said it should go to the families. It should go to the families of the people that died from an opioid overdose as a result of being sold up the river by the big pharma companies and the feds that looked the other way and let that fucking shit happen. People died and lost their loved ones, tens of thousands. And so I totally see where Dennis is coming from in his opinion.
I kind of wonder, looking at that list, it sounds like, if I were setting up let's take it away from people losing lives. If I were just setting up a everyday run-of-the-mill nonprofit, then I'd get a bunch of my friends together and say, you're now the executive assistant to the vice president in charge of marketing and loss prevention and all these other words, because they sound like the same words. That a corporate meeting would take place, and these people get paid to make decisions. And you know how this stuff goes. I'm sure you've been around a few corporate meetings in the past. I'm not, without naming any names.
Yeah, right.
But you kind of go, this just sounds like
shady.
Shuffling one pile of dirt over into a different pile and saying, I better charge you to move this pile of dirt, or I'll make other people do it and I'll just collect money off the top. It sounds very skeptical. I hate that I have to sound that way, but it doesn't come without reason.
Yeah, well, we hear about so much cynical shit in the media and the news all the time. And, I say it all the time, Dean. You know what the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the U.S. public, in my opinion, is? A white shirt, tie, and a suit. Because, man, white-collar crime is some of the most scandalous crime out there. And it's like, for me anymore, I have double reservations when I'm talking to somebody in a suit. And if you don't think it makes a difference, here's a little test for you. Go to 7-Eleven wearing shorts, tank, and a flip-flop, and just kind of wait till there's a few people milling around the door up front. See if anybody opens the door for you or says anything to you. Then go back wearing a suit, a white shirt, and a tie, and I swear, I'm telling you, if you do it a couple times, somebody's going to say, here, let me get that for you, sir. And they'll open the fucking door for you and treat you completely different. Ask me how I know, because it happened to me, I know. And so, anyway, Dean, the point I'm making is, man, we hear about all this scandal with all these different government agencies and nonprofits and, charter schools. I mean, I could just start picking them all. You know what I mean? And so
you know what you do? You give the money to an agency that's already being paid. And let their account, like the IRS, says, okay, you guys are going to hold on to the money, and IRS is nothing to screw around with. You just can't go, I need to hire 5 guys to run a corporate meeting to determine how we can pilfer some money out of the account and go on big executive vacations and, buy a few golden parachutes. And at least there'd be some sort of agency, or just, let's start some sort of agency, one agency that doles out the money that, that is, I'm almost joking when I say this, but that isn't corrupt.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a better way of doing it. Otherwise, Dennis was right. Give it to the families,
Well, I'm glad you said it the way you did, Dean. I love the idea of the families getting, the big chunk of this. I do like the philosophy behind. Let's bring that list up again. I like the philosophy behind these different categories. It's just, man, when you're talking about that much money, man, the crooks come out. They do. They come out. The opportunists and things to that nature. And so now the next one, I know you're a big fan of this, as am I, the naloxone distribution, which, of course, is Narcan. But I found it interesting, $800,000, a nice chunk of change. Yet, it's not much compared to some of these other categories that are so vague, in my opinion.
That doesn't buy too many free vending machines for
Yeah, yeah.
Narcan or whatever. That
Yep. Well, what I'll say is the things prior to that are more proactive, where now we're getting into kind of reactive things. So, like, for example, the next one, the criminal justice diversion. $500,000 there, and I'm not exactly sure what that means. I mean, I'm familiar with, diversion programs, after the fact that somebody's been arrested or what have you, to try to cut down on recidivism, as we say, in the jail and prison system. But, well, what does that mean? Criminal justice diversion, So, you start peeling away the layers of the onion, so to speak, on this, man. You can start to get real deep, but I just feel like there needs to be this watchdog group, almost kind of like what you were describing, Dean, that's just looking at all this stuff to make sure somebody's not lining their own pockets, with blood on their hands from all the people that have died from these opioid overdoses. So here's 1.1 million addiction treatment for incarcerated individuals. Now, like I said before, I guarantee there's people out there like, fuck them people, man. He never should have been using in the first place. Let him suffer, Believe me, there are people like that, man. There absolutely are. On the other hand, if we don't do anything, as the old saying goes, to rehabilitate people when they are locked up, what are we getting when they come back out? More of a hardened criminal? What are we doing to try to help these people get their life back on track? So personally, I don't have a problem with, a millie going to that, just making sure it's used for the proper things, because that is a very open-ended and vague description, addiction treatment for incarcerated individuals,
Well, you go and you kind of figure out, well, how many prisons are there in that state?
Yeah,
and divide that into the 1 point whatever million, and then it starts looking pretty thin.
Yeah. Well, and then you go right into the last one, education and primary prevention, and that received the least amount on the list, $331,500 for education and primary prevention, which, again, I'm sure everybody can agree, that's kind of a vague, open-ended category. So a lot of responsibility at the end of the day for the people or person, that decides who's going to be getting parts of that money. And remember what I said, folks, that's just one little county, Wake County in North Carolina, and we're not picking on them or anything. It just happened to be a very timely story because they literally just voted on all this stuff yesterday. So this is what's going on around the country with the opioid crisis in the news. We've got new drugs out on the street that everybody's got to be careful of. You've got governors, suing the DEA because the DEA apparently allowed street-level drug dealers in their custody to go back out on the streets and keep dealing in hopes that they would get to a higher source in that drug dealing chain. And then you've got places like Wake County trying to dice and slice all this settlement money from the big pharmas to try to help prevent more of this stuff from coming and to help the people who struggled through it all and are still struggling. So, yeah, man, that kind of sort of brings us full circle, Dean. We recapped what the show is all about. We talked about the latest statistics with the opioid and overdose crisis in the United States. We talked a little bit about the news, and that's the focus of this particular edition of the Dare Me podcast, episode 1, season 2. So with that being said, I'm looking forward to our coming shows. We've got some great guests lined up from a variety of different areas. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we talk about drugs and addiction and recovery, but we talk talk about other things as well. Enlightenment and spirituality. We're going to have some great conversations on that. Fitness and exercise and suggestions for, getting back into fitness when you're able to get off the dope and staying in that lifestyle afterwards. It's kind of like what I said earlier. Any old asshole can get clean, but what are you going to do to stay clean? And so we fully intend to talk more about those topics as we go forward into season 2, and we hope that you like it. So anyhow, with all that said, Dean, I thought we had a pretty good show for first one out of the gate, season 2. What do you think?
I think it's good energy and going in a positive way, and Yeah, I'm excited, and I want to remind everybody watching to like, follow, and share. Please like, follow, share. Sometimes you catch it on YouTube and you watch it, and you might even watch it every week. And I go, oh great, it's there. But follow. That lets us know that you're out there. Send comments. We will reply. We will. Absolutely be there in every capacity. So.
Well, you know what, Dean? I'm glad that you brought that up because, one of the things that was kind of a catalyst for me to do season 2, first and foremost, is that we just hear from so many people. Even still, I get DMs from people, parents looking for information on the treatment centers that they want to help their child with and things to that nature. But we've had over 30,000 views just on the YouTube channel. And so, it kind of blows my mind when you get that many views on the channel, but not everybody subscribes. So I appreciate you saying that, Dean. Please, folks, if you would, just click subscribe. Like some of the stuff we're doing. It helps with the algorithm so that when people are looking for information on how to get through opioid withdrawals and things to that nature, our stuff will be considered more relevant and come up in their search. So just by clicking subscribe or like, you might be helping save somebody's life, and that ain't no joke. Now, on another note, Dean, I got to mention that since we wrapped up season 1, our podcast is now available on any podcast platform you can imagine. We are now on Spotify. We are on iHeart. We are on SoundCloud. We are on Amazon. We're on Podcaster. We're on all of them. And just not to toot our own horn, man, but it just blows my mind. I had the podcast, because they've been on them platforms for a couple of months now. I don't check the analytics regularly, but after just 2 weeks of being on Spotify and SoundCloud and all them, we had over 246 streams. It might not sound like big numbers to some people, but to me, that just blows my mind, man. But it also, I think, goes to show that, there's a lot of people out there still struggling and still looking for information on how to get off of opiates. And like I said before, y'all, if I can do it, you can do it. So we hope we provided some informative and entertaining content this time. First one out of the gate for season 2. We'll start to hit our stride as we go, Dean. I was telling Dean before we, started the show tonight that, I really didn't have any scripted outline or whatever. I kind of sort of knew what we wanted to talk about. That once we started talking, we just go wherever the show takes us. And that's kind of how I feel about this show, that it truly has taken on a life of its own. All right, y'all, we hope you enjoyed this edition of the show. We are back. We're so back, as the saying goes. Season 2 of the Dare Me podcast, season 2, episode 1 is now officially in the can, figuratively, and we hope not literally. We hope it's a good show, not in the can, but you get the idea. It is officially recorded, and onward we go. Next! We'll see you next time on the Dare Me podcast.